So often science becomes the tool, the means by which people actually end up denying the very existence of the Creator himself. What a tragedy. Let's consider the creation of the sun, moon, and stars and their significance and importance to us as believers in the Lord Jesus Christ. First of all, I want you to notice verse 14, the beginning, the divine decree. There's always a divine decree. God created by the spoken word. That's how he did it. This is why words, this is what makes us very distinct. We are beings, creatures, who can communicate with words. God is the ultimate being who communicates with words and accomplishes things with words. Because we read in verse 14, and God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven. God said it. God spoke it. It was a commandment. Let there be. Let there come into existence, into being, lights, luminaries, those things which would give forth light. Think of a campfire at night, as you have the wood that you have put into the campfire, and you get it started and lit, and there's this great fire and flame coming there, and it's casting forth light to those all around the campfire. So at least in that area you can see that campfire. The flames are the luminary body that is casting light forth. And so we see here God is saying, let there come into being these luminary bodies that will cast forth light. Psalm 74 and verse 16, the day is thine, the night also is thine. Thou hast prepared the light and the sun. God is the creator and maker of these. And where were these, or where are these to be put? In the firmament. The word firmament means the expanse of the heavens, of the loftiness, the highness that goes on and on in that realm. These things were to be placed. We would understand these today with our understanding of science to be what is identified in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, as the second heaven. The realm that goes beyond the atmosphere, the outer space where the heavenly bodies go. This is the creation, the filling of the second heaven, and the appearance of these things in the first heaven, in the atmosphere. We who are looking up into the air, we see the sun, the moon, and the stars, but they are actually placed in the second heaven, in outer space. We notice the divine purpose. Why did God make these things? This is unique, because often when we read of some of the things of what God made of these different days, there's not a purpose that is given. But God gives us a purpose, a reason why he made the sun, the moon, and the stars. Very clearly stated here in verse 14. It says, and God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, to make the day and night distinct. They were to be that which, when the sun is there and visible, it's day. It starts with dawn. When the sun pops up over the horizon, day begins until the sun sets and goes below the horizon, and the day ends. And then the moon comes out. Now, don't say, well, sometimes I can see the moon before the sun actually sets. Don't be so technical. Basically, the moon, we see that at nighttime. And it's when the moon's out, it's night. There's a distinction here. And God did this for that purpose. But that's not the only purpose. We read on here. It says, and let them be for... This is God speaking. What are they? They have a purpose. For signs, and for seasons, and for days, and years. There's a purpose why God has made these things. First, to provide for signs, markers, monuments, pointers. For who? For the animals? For people. For us. You see, the creation of God, progressively, day by day, has man in mind. That is so very important for us to see. God is the glorious creator. But human beings are significant to God. And as He is creating and developing and making more complex this world, man is in mind. God is doing it with man in mind. Signs, markers. And so do we not use these things to get direction? The sun rises in the east. We know that direction. The sun sets in the west. We know that direction. We can determine the north at night by looking at the North Star or by looking at the constellations. If you were out at sea, I was talking with somebody who's in the Navy. I said, does anybody in the Navy ever do anything like where you can actually at night read the stars? You can actually navigate by the stars? He says on the submarine there's usually a couple of guys who could do that just in case you get into a pinch. They could actually bring the submarine up and you can have some guys go out and look at the stars and determine the direction that they would have to go in. Yeah, and that's an old thing that sailors have and we're able to do. They're created to help us as markers to show us the way that we can go. But they're also meant as supernatural markers. The sun, the moon, and the stars have a pattern that they follow. It's a pattern that just goes on and on. There's a natural pattern that happens in the universe as we look at these heavenly bodies. But sometimes God, in order to get His point across, oh boy, God will do something. God will break the natural pattern to get the attention of human beings living in the world that perhaps He's working in a very special way, such that He's actually going to change the normal pattern of things. And there were signs and wonders that happened. Like one of the plagues in Egypt, when for 3 days it was darkness in Egypt. For 3 days, how can it must have been just a really cloudy day. There was darkness, like night, for 3 days. How can that be? It's a miracle. It's a supernatural sign. God's trying to get through, get a message to people that God is real. God is so real that He can actually change the natural scheme of things when it comes to the planets, when it comes to the earth, the moon, and the sun, and the stars. We go on and think of another example. We think about Joshua, who called and asked God to make the sun stand still. And the sun stood still. You say, that's impossible. That can't happen. Why can't that happen? The God who created the universe, He can't stop the normal pattern and do something different if He chooses? Think that through a little bit. If you think that through a little bit, it's not so hard. But I'll tell you one thing. It certainly was an encouragement to Joshua and to the children of Israel to see. They knew that God was on their side as He kept it light so that they could complete the battle against their enemy and get the victory. We think about Hezekiah, who asked God for a sign that he would live. And Isaiah the prophet was able, what do you want to do? You want the sundial to go forward or backward? Hezekiah said, it's kind of a light thing if it goes forward, so make it go backward. And it did. How can the sundial go backwards? That's like going like how can that happen? God can do whatever He wants. But I'll tell you one thing, it got a hold of Hezekiah so that he knew that he could trust in the promise of God. Yeah. Signs that God gives. And there are many. We think of the Star of Bethlehem that directed the wise men to that place where the Messiah, the Christ child, was born. We think about the end day, the day of the Lord, when the sun will be turned into darkness, the moon will be turned to blood before that great and terrible day of the Lord. Yes, Yes, God will do mighty things in the future with those physical bodies in the heaven, as a sign to human beings that God is real and that God will do what He says. God created these things with all of this in mind. When God created the sun, moon, and stars, He knew what He was going to do. He knew He was going to create man, that these could serve as signs for, and for seasons. To distinguish times and seasons for man. They were created for that purpose, so that human beings can actually count the number of days and the number of years. They can have months. They can have seasons there when they can do certain things. It says in Psalm 104 and verse 19, He, God, appointed the moon for seasons. The moon is that which has a cycle, a monthly cycle. And so we have this whole concept of this unit of time called a month, because of the moon that's up there. It helps us as human beings to be able to... God lives above time. God doesn't need time. The eternal God lived and existed for eternity past, and there was no time before the creation of the world. But we as human beings, we live in time. And God, who created us with a concept of chronology of time, also created the sun, moon, and stars. Help us to be able to understand time when it comes to seasons, days, and the counting of years. But something else. We read on a little bit further here. It says, and let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. And it was so. You see, God now has created the sun to give light upon the earth. As to where did the light come from then before there was a sun to give light upon the earth? I don't know. Oh, you know those Christians who believe that God actually created all of that the first day, and that the light was sort of filtering through the waters above. That's the explanation. Not saying that. The God who will someday do away with the sun and the moon, and Revelation indicates that in the eternal state there will be no more sun. No. But God will give light in the eternal state. God will be the giver. Christ will be the giver of light. He will get. So God can provide that light in whatever way He chooses on the first, the second, the third day. On the fourth day, however, it was the sun that is now giving light upon the earth. It is the moon and the stars that are giving light upon the earth at nighttime. A new source of light, as we read in Scripture. And the divine accomplishment. And it was so. It happened. What God said, let there be, it happened. It came into being. We read in verse 16 the distinctions of these lights. And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. Now we have a breakdown of these different luminaries that are out there in the heavens. There's, first of all, the greater light. And we would correspond this, of course, to the sun. Do you know that the word sun does not actually appear in the Bible until you get to Genesis chapter 15? It doesn't even appear. But this greater light is referring to the sun, the Shemesh, which means to be brilliant. It's talking about the sun, and the sun is brilliant. We were watching something on on one of the PBS channels there about the war, the Second World War, and how there were American prisoners in a Japanese war camp who were looking out at the American planes flying over, and as a punishment, the Japanese took those men who were looking and kind of glorying in the soon victory of America, and took them and made them look up at the sun for a long period of time in that brilliance there. No doubt very, very blinding in their experience there. The sun is very, very brilliant. It really is. The sun is